Last Thursday, I made a video saying that space exploration in Starfield isn't what people thought. I made that video based on a lot of questions I got where people definitely missed information from Bethesda. People were asking me if you can land on a planet or take off from a planet and fly to another planet. The answer is no, you cannot. And myself and seemingly quite a few other people had incorrectly assumed that when you land in space in Starfield, before you fast travel to a planet or open up your scanner to drop you into the landing animation on a planet, that you were just in a small skybox that would not move you in any direction whatsoever. You would never get closer to a planet, or that you would eventually hit like an outer bounds wall and you wouldn't be able to go any further. Again, both of those things are incorrect. But I ended up not being 100% sure and wanted to test it. So I did what any sane person would do and spent 7 hours flying to Pluto. Now, the reason I picked Pluto, despite it technically not being a planet, I know it is not functionally going to act any differently in Starfield. Bethesda's not going to be like, well, Pluto's not a planet, let's design that differently. I chose Pluto because when you drop in orbit around a planet before you fast travel to it, it was like the shortest distance. Another part of the reason that I chose Pluto instead of choosing Earth was because Earth's orbit was way too fast. It was so difficult for me to keep up with how fast Earth was moving. That was the first one that I tried, but Earth would just disappear from view if I was flying straight super quickly. Pluto, while it would still shift in and out of frame in about an hour, was much, much slower and thus much more achievable. I didn't have to stay awake the entire time. I finished actually playing the game for a few hours and then went to bed and left Starfield running. But there were hiccups, several of them, several things that I found to be unexpected challenges in getting to Pluto / seeing if we could get to Pluto. Now, it pretty quickly became obvious that we were actually getting to Pluto as Pluto was getting bigger. So that part was proving to be worth it. Pluto was getting larger in the screen, bit by bit. And the kilometer distance to Pluto was slowly counting down, and for reference, I was on the base ship with 1 engine upgrade. Though, based on what happened when I actually got there, I don't imagine any ship is ever going to be fast enough for you to frequently travel between planets. The game is clearly not designed for you to actually be able to do this. It isn't actually functional. Did I get to Pluto? Technically, yes. Did I really get to Pluto? No. You'll see. But I don't imagine, no matter how fast your ship is or what engine upgrades you get, that this is ever going to be a feasible part of the game. It is clearly not designed this way. But all planets in Starfield solar systems have orbits, which I think is so unbelievably cool. So the way I figured this out is that as I was flying towards Pluto for a certain amount of time, eventually the sphere that is Pluto, even though I was centered right in the middle of the planet, would shift out of frame. I think it started going like bottom right and then ended up top left. And I was just so surprised they had factored in orbits. Like, what a cool thing to discover, despite it making this process really annoying for me. I expected to be able to go to sleep and set an alarm for 7 hours later, which is like what I had figured it would take. It seemed like, I think it was every 50 kilometers was about 15 minutes. So I had to set an alarm for every 30 minutes to readjust my ship to make sure that we wouldn't go way out of Pluto's orbit and then accidentally overshoot it or like head in the wrong direction, which actually did start happening at one point. Because of that setup, because I had to set an alarm for every 30 minutes, instead of just leaving my Xbox running here in my office, I took the controller into my bedroom and put the stream on my screen in my bedroom, and so was occasionally waking up and adjusting it with maximum latency because I was watching the delay of the stream and trying to readjust the ship. It's like clearly very weird movement because, yeah, not only was I not in the same room as the Xbox, I don't think that actually would have caused much issue. Like, I've played in movie theaters before. The Xbox is like in the projection room. That doesn't seem to cause problems. It was the stream delay that caused the issue. So I was adjusting live on Twitch. Very difficult every 30 minutes. And occasionally my controller would disconnect even though I had it plugged in, which I guess was happening because I was not connected to my Xbox, I was connected to a power outlet. There was one part where I slightly overslept and I think the controller was disconnected for like a good several minutes and people were like panicking in the chat. It was one of the worst sleeps I've ever had. Didn't expect that to be part of it. Also, sorry if you can hear my dog chewing a bone in the background. But as we got closer, woke up in the morning, splashed some water on my face, ready to face Pluto, we finally actually got there. One of the wildest things about this is that even while I was asleep, streaming nothing but space, which by the way, I was also sleeping too, right? It is actually really calming. The only downside is that I have one crewmate on my ship who would occasionally cough. Other than that, it's very peaceful. There were like 4,000 people watching while I was asleep. Nuts. So, when we actually got to Pluto, as we start to get closer and the planet is at the point where it's taking up the whole screen, it's just either white or it's black, depending on which way it is facing the sun, which again, the whole orbit thing, very, very, very cool. However, it's extremely low res. You are definitely not supposed to be this close. I mean, why would anyone do this in this game anyway? It's insane. And there are a lot of people that have different opinions about like, oh, what it's realistic. What did you expect from space travel? Versus like, it's a video game, so you should be able to travel and it should be fun. I think I'm in the camp of people of like, the point of this game, especially now that I've played a lot more of it, is that it's an RPG and it's about talking to people. It's not really a space exploration game, and that's okay. But how you feel about that is how you feel about that. So we get there, the resolution's terrible, clearly not designed for you to be this close, and then as I get very, very, very close to the surface, like a few meters away, you start to see the headlights of the ship show up on the planet, so it's like a big white light. Ooh. It was flat. Pluto confirmed flat. Flat Earth! We just went right through it! Wait, but it still says 0. Hang on. Am I inside Pluto? What happens if I turn around from here? I'm going to turn around with my engines off so I'm not actually moving. Just to see if there is any sign of Pluto behind me. We're inside of Pluto. We're definitely inside of Pluto. I wonder how long does it now take to get out of Pluto? Do I just live here now? So we have confirmed that things in space are physically where they say they are. How long will it take me to get does anyone know the diameter of Pluto? How long will it take me to get out? Pluto is literally the distance we traveled to get to Pluto. I'm moving. Or we can confirm that I'm moving if we look at something else, right? Is there anything? But they're too far away. Okay, yeah, see, Sharon is moving. So I am moving inside Pluto. Flying against the orbit will cut the time down. I can't come into Pluto and not see what it looks like to get out of Pluto. That would be absurd. And then no noise, no impact. As cool as I think it would be if they made you explode, we actually just clipped straight through the planet and everything became invisible. This is not actually that uncommon in game development to not have anything mapped to the inside of a sphere, but confirmed it is a sphere. It is not flat. It is probably a rotating sphere that is also in orbit, which again, I think is like super cool. But you go inside the planet and it says 0 to Pluto, and it said that for as long as I flew. I think I flew maybe like another 15 minutes in one direction and didn't get any further. I didn't get out of Pluto because it is just a big empty sphere. And it is big, and I suspect perfectly to scale with every other hollow sphere of a planet inside of the solar system. And this is how I imagine they have done every single solar system. What I don't think you can do, and I still don't know because it would take, I would test it, but it would take 1,000 hours, 10,000 hours. I don't think you can fly between systems. If Pluto is the furthest out of the Sol system, I don't suspect that you can fly from Sol to another system. That said, it's possible, and the reason that I think this is even possible is that having a bunch of spheres that don't actually have anything on them and are actually very low resolution, you're just seeing them from really far away, is actually not that intensive for a video game. That's actually not that difficult. I mean, there are so many of them, but really they're just a bunch of images. Again, I think the orbits is what makes it a lot cooler. But it's not actually that hard to have a whole bunch of these planets because they're just not very resource intensive. So I don't suspect, again, that you can fly between solar systems, but you may be able to. I don't know that anyone will achieve that without modding. The second part of that is I also still don't know if you can fly from Pluto's orbit to another planet's orbit. So like I said, we spawned outside of Pluto intentionally and then flew towards Pluto. I don't know if you can spawn outside of Pluto, like fast travel to outside of Pluto and then fly to the next nearest planet or like fly to Earth. I don't know if there are separate instances for these planets, but I suspect that you can. I suspect that you can get closer to each planet in every individual solar system. Again, it's weird to call it a planet when really it is a empty sphere. And eventually we figured that it was a sphere because I flew out of it. So I flew straight towards Pluto, flew through it, and then hooked a left because I figured because of the orbit of the planet, I would come out a little bit faster if I went left than if I kept going straight through because, I mean, Pluto is like the distance that I traveled to get to Pluto is the same distance that the inside of Pluto would have been. So it would have taken another 7 hours to get out. But yes, I hooked a left and eventually popped out of Pluto. And weirdly, yeah, Pluto like started to like tuck under me because of the orbit. So the reason I think orbits exist, which again, very cool, was like delighted to discover that here, is so that when you are standing on any of these planets, every other planet in the solar system is accurately moving. So like if you're on a planet that doesn't have light pollution, whatever, you can see all of space, you can see every other planet, they are actually moving around in their correct patterns. So the purpose is not to visit these planets. The purpose is to, when you're on a planet, see the other planets moving in space. That's why I think Todd Howard in one of the presentations said, see the moon, it's actually there. While that is technically correct, the moon is actually there and that you could take off and fly to it and clip through it. It is an object that exists in space within the solar system with every other planet orbiting. So no, clearly it is not designed for you to actually visit planets. There is no landing animation. You can't fly to a planet and then land on it like you can in No Man's Sky. They did say that from the start. But you can get up very, very, very close and then eventually go inside of a planet. It is technically possible. You are moving through space. The game is just definitely not designed for you to do that. And honestly, one of the first things that I wanted to try when even booting up Starfield was flying into the sun just to see what would happen. I suspect the exact same thing would happen that happened here, but the problem is the sun is so far away. If it took me 7 hours to get from Pluto's orbit to Pluto and you can't spawn near the sun at all, I would have to spawn in the orbit of the nearest planet. I mean, again, 1,000 years. It would take so long to get there. But thank you to everybody who joined me on this fun journey of flying to Pluto for 7 hours straight, just to confirm for science if you are really moving in space and what the objects in space actually do. I think an explosion animation would have been really cool, and that's like maybe a cool mod. But more than anything, I took away that, while very inconvenient for the purposes of my experiment, the fact that it orbits is so neat.